Have you ever felt like a prisoner in your own mind, trapped in an endless storm of anxiety, fear, and burning anger? What if the key to your chains was hidden in ancient wisdom? Today, we unlock the Stoic secrets to mastering your emotions and reclaiming your unshakable peace. The sun set over the bustling port of Piraeus, casting long, jagged shadows across the stone docks. For most of the merchants in ancient Athens, the fading light signaled an end to a day of profitable trade, a time to retreat to their hearths, share wine, and laugh with their families. But for Lucius, the encroaching darkness only mirrored the suffocating blackness expanding within his own chest. Lucius was a man who had built his life on a foundation of control. He was a master of logistics, a calculator of risks, and a merchant who prided himself on foreseeing every variable. He knew the winds, he knew the tides, and he knew the whims of the marketplace. Yet, standing at the edge of the Aegean Sea, gripping the rough wood of a mooring post until his knuckles turned white, he was a man entirely undone. 3 days ago, a devastating squall, unseasonal, unpredictable, and fiercely violent, had swept across the Mediterranean. It had caught his fleet of 3 merchant vessels, heavily laden with grain, olive oil, and precious silks from the east. The messenger who brought the news that morning had spoken only 6 words before Lucius's world collapsed. The sea took them, all lost. In that single, agonizing moment, the mind of Lucius became a tempest, far more destructive than the one that had swallowed his ships. Fear was the first invader. It did not merely knock at the door of his mind. It kicked it down. It painted vivid, terrifying murals of his immediate future. He saw himself destitute, wandering the streets in rags. He saw the faces of his creditors contorted with rage, demanding silver he no longer possessed. He envisioned his family cast out of their comfortable home, their honor stripped, their lives reduced to begging for scraps. Then came the anger, a hot, venomous rage that boiled in his stomach and rose to scorch his throat. He was angry at the captains for not navigating better. He was angry at the weather for its cruel timing. He was furiously, unspeakably angry at the gods, at fate itself, for singling him out for such ruin. "Why me?" his mind screamed into the void. "I did everything right. I made the sacrifices. I calculated the routes. It is not fair." For 3 nights, Lucius didn't sleep. The anxiety became a physical entity, a heavy stone resting on his lungs, making every breath shallow and frantic. When he closed his eyes, he didn't see the comforting darkness of rest. He saw the splintering of wood, the churning waves, the gold coins sinking into the lightless abyss. He paced the mosaic floors of his home like a caged beast, his mind spinning in a relentless cycle of what-ifs and if-onlys. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Seneca. Lucius was a living embodiment of Seneca's timeless observation. His ships had sunk once, in a matter of hours. But in his mind, Lucius was watching his ships sink 1,000 times a day. He was living the poverty he feared before it had even arrived. He was experiencing the scorn of his peers before a single word had been spoken against him. He was suffering the future in the present, compounding his actual loss with a mountain of fabricated agony. He was drowning, not in the Aegean Sea, but in the turbulent, unmanaged waters of his own perceptions. He believed that his despair was the natural, unavoidable consequence of losing his wealth. He believed his anger was justified, his anxiety necessary to somehow figure a way out of the abyss. He did not yet understand the fundamental truth of human suffering, that it is not the events themselves that destroy us, but the stories we tell ourselves about those events. Exhausted, hollowed out, and desperate for an escape from his own mind, Lucius finally left his home on the 4th morning. He wandered aimlessly toward the agora, the vibrant heart of Athenian civic life, hoping the noise of the crowd might drown out the deafening screams of his internal monologue. But as he walked among the merchants, the philosophers, and the citizens, he felt only a profound, isolating alienation. He was a ghost haunting his own life, tethered to a disaster he could neither change nor accept. The agora was a cacophony of sights and sounds. Vendors shouted prices for fresh figs and salted meats. Politicians argued atop stone steps. Blacksmiths hammered iron in the distance. To Lucius, it was all a blur of meaningless motion. He slumped onto a stone bench near a gurgling fountain, burying his face in his hands, surrendering to the crushing weight of his despair. "You carry a burden heavier than the stone you sit upon, traveller." A voice broke through his stupor. Lucius looked up. Standing beside him was an older man holding a simple broom of bound twigs. He wore a threadbare tunic, yet there was an undeniable regal quality to his posture. His eyes, framed by deep wrinkles of age and sun, held a profound, undisturbed stillness. It was a calmness that felt almost offensive to Lucius in his current state of turmoil. "Leave me be, old man," Lucius snapped, the anger flaring easily. "You know nothing of my burdens. I have lost everything. My ships, my wealth, my future, all swallowed by the sea. I am ruined." The old man didn't flinch at the venom in Lucius's voice. He slowly swept a pile of dust into the gutter, leaning on his broom. "You have lost wood, cloth, and oil," the man replied softly. "Yet you act as though you have lost your mind, your character, and your soul. Tell me, did the sea take those as well? Or did you throw them overboard yourself?" Lucius bristled, standing up to face the man. "How dare you speak to me of what I have lost? I am a merchant. My wealth is my life. Fate has robbed me." "My name is Cleanthus," the old man said, extending a calloused hand, completely ignoring Lucius's outrage. "And I see a man who is bleeding, not from a wound inflicted by the world, but from a blade he is twisting into his own side." Against his better judgment, Lucius sat back down. There was something in Cleanthus's unwavering tranquility that drew him in, a stark contrast to the chaos tearing him apart. "If you are so wise," Lucius muttered, "tell me how to stop this torment. Tell me how to undo the storm." "I cannot undo the storm," Cleanthus said, taking a seat at the opposite end of the bench. "No man can command the winds or forbid the waves from crashing. The gods do not grant us dominion over the heavens or the seas. But they have granted us something far more powerful, if only we have the courage to claim it." Cleanthus drew a line in the dust with the handle of his broom. "The root of your suffering, my friend, is a fundamental misunderstanding of the universe. You are tying your happiness to things that are not yours to control." Cleanthus pointed to one side of the line. "Here lies the domain of the world, the weather, the economy, the opinions of others, the health of your body, the fate of your ships. These things are to ukef hemin, not up to us. They are subject to fortune, to chance, to the actions of others." He then pointed to the other side of the line. "And here lies your domain. Ta'ef hemin, what is up to us? Our judgments, our impulses, our desires, our aversions, our choices, our character." Lucius frowned. "Are you saying I should just not care that I am ruined?" "I am saying you are not ruined," Cleanthus corrected gently. "Your wealth is ruined. Your ego is bruised. But you, Lucius, the ruling center of your mind, remain untouched, unless you choose to surrender it. You believed you controlled the sea because you mapped the routes. That was an illusion. The sea does what the sea will do. Cleanthes paused, letting the word settle. He then offered a metaphor that would serve as Lucius's first lifeline. "Imagine an archer," Cleanthes said, gesturing as if pulling back an invisible bowstring. "He spends years perfecting his craft. He selects the finest wood for his bow. He fletches his arrows with the utmost care. He trains his eye, steadies his breathing, and accounts for the distance. He pulls the string back, takes perfect aim, and releases the arrow." Cleanthes dropped his hands. "Once that arrow leaves the bow, does the archer control it?" "No," Lucius answered slowly. "A sudden gust of wind could blow it off course. The target could move. A bird could fly into its path." "Exactly," Cleanthes smiled. "The archer has done everything within his power. His duty, his excellence, lies in the aiming. Once the arrow is in the air, he must accept whatever happens with equanimity. If it hits the bull's-eye, he rejoices in his skill. If the wind blows it astray, he remains at peace, knowing he aimed true. The outcome was not up to him." He leaned in closer to Lucius. "You, Lucius, are the archer. You built good ships. You hired able men. You planned well. You took aim. But the wind, the storm, blew your arrow off course. You are weeping and tearing your hair out because you demand control over the wind. It is madness. It is fighting against the very nature of the universe." Lucius stared at the line in the dust. For the first time in days, the heavy stone on his chest felt marginally lighter. The absolute, terrifying grip of his anxiety began to loosen. "My anxiety," Lucius whispered, the realization dawning on him. "It comes from trying to control the uncontrollable." "Yes," Cleanthes nodded. "Anxiety is the agonizing gap between what you want to happen and what is actually happening. It is the futile attempt of the mind to wrestle the future into submission. You fear poverty, so you suffer poverty now. You cannot control whether you will be poor tomorrow, but you can control how you respond to the possibility today. Will you face it with dignity, resourcefulness, and courage? Or will you face it weeping like a child whose toy has been broken? Some things are in our control and others not. Things in our control are opinion, pursuit, desire, aversion, and, in a word, whatever are our own actions. Things not in our control are body, property, reputation, command, and, in one word, whatever are not our own actions." Epictetus. The words washed over Lucius like cool water on a severe burn. He realized that his fear was a ghost, a phantom born of his own judgment. The shipwreck was an objective, neutral fact. Wood broke, water entered, metal sank. It was his judgment. "This is terrible. I am destroyed. I cannot survive this." That was causing his emotional agony. "I must separate the event from my judgment of the event," Lucius concluded, looking at Cleanthes with a new clarity. "That is the beginning of wisdom." The sage smiled, rising to his feet and picking up his broom. "You cannot stop the storms of the world, Lucius, but you can learn to be the calm center within them. Govern your mind, and you govern your life. Let the sea have its gold. Keep your soul for yourself." As Cleanthes walked away, sweeping the dusty stones, Lucius sat alone by the fountain. The agora was still loud, the world was still uncertain, and his ships were still at the bottom of the ocean. But the internal storm had broken. He was no longer a victim of fate. He was a mind, reclaiming its throne. Armed with the profound realization of the dichotomy of control, Lucius felt a fragile peace taking root in his mind. Over the next few days, he worked diligently to apply the archer's mindset. He met with his creditors, not with weeping or begging, but with the calm, steady resolve of a man accepting his reality. He outlined a plan to sell his estate, pay off a portion of his debts, and start anew on a smaller scale. He was aiming his bow again, accepting that the target might still move. However, the Stoic path is rarely a straight, untroubled road. The world is relentless, and it frequently tests our newfound philosophies to see if they are made of stone or sand. One sweltering afternoon, Lucius was walking through a narrow, crowded street in the merchant district. He was reviewing his ledgers, calculating how many drachmae he could salvage from the sale of his remaining warehouse. Suddenly, a harsh, mocking voice cut through the ambient noise. Well, if it isn't the great Lucius, the master of the seas, or should I say, the master of the sea bottom. Lucius stopped. Blocking his path was Demetrius, a rival merchant. Demetrius was a man of lesser skill but greater ruthlessness, a man who had long envied Lucius's success. Demetrius was flanked by 2 burly guards and wore a smirk so condescending it made Lucius's blood instantly run hot. Worse still, Demetrius owed Lucius a significant sum of money from a trade agreement forged months ago, money that could now keep Lucius from losing his home entirely. "I see the gods have finally punished your arrogance," Demetrius sneered loudly, drawing the attention of passing citizens. "Word has it you are little better than a beggar now. I suppose that debt I owe you will have to be written off, seeing as you won't have the funds to hire a magistrate to collect it." In a fraction of a second, the fragile peace Lucius had built shattered. The anger hit him not as a thought, but as a violent physical reaction. His vision tunneled, his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. A surge of adrenaline flooded his limbs, screaming at him to lunge forward, to wrap his hands around Demetrius's throat, to beat that smug smile into the dirt. He felt the heat of fury radiating from his chest. "How dare he?" Lucius thought. "After everything I have suffered, he mocks me. He tries to steal from me." Anger, as the Stoics warned, is a brief madness. It bypasses logic, ignores virtue, and demands immediate, destructive action. Lucius was a split second away from throwing himself at Demetrius, an act that would undoubtedly result in him being beaten by the guards, thrown in a cell, and stripped of the last shred of his dignity. But just as the muscles in his legs tensed to spring, a voice echoed in his memory. It was Clentha's voice. "Are you bleeding from a wound inflicted by the world, or from a blade you are twisting into your own side?" Lucius froze. He engaged the most powerful weapon in the Stoic arsenal, the pause. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our freedom and our power to choose. Anger demands that we eliminate that space, that we react instantly to the perceived insult. By forcing himself to pause, to simply breathe and observe the sensation of anger rather than becoming it, Lucius regained control of the citadel of his mind. He looked at Demetrius, really looked at him. He bypassed the insult and analyzed the man delivering it. When people injure you, ask yourself what good or harm they thought would come of it. If you understand that, you'll feel sympathy rather than outrage or anger. Your sense of good and evil may be the same as theirs, or near it, in which case you have to excuse them. Or your sense of good and evil may differ from theirs, in which case they're misguided and deserve your compassion. Marcus Aurelius. Lucius realized with striking clarity that Demetrius's mockery wasn't a reflection of Lucius's worth. It was a glaring spotlight on Demetrius's own flawed character. Why would a man gloat over another's misfortune? Only out of deep-seated insecurity, envy, and a fundamental ignorance of what is truly good. Demetrius believed that wealth made a man superior, and therefore poverty made a man weak. He was operating under a delusion. No man does evil knowingly, Lucius reminded himself, echoing the Socratic wisdom foundational to Stoicism. Demetrius thinks he is acting in his own best interest. He thinks this cruelty makes him powerful. He is blind to the damage he does to his own soul. Lucius's anger began to evaporate, replaced by a cool, almost clinical detachment, and even a sliver of pity. If a blind man bumped into him on the street, Lucius would not be angry. He would understand the man could not see. Demetrius was morally blind. Why should Lucius allow a blind man's flailing to dictate his own emotional state? Why should I be angry? Lucius thought. If I react with rage, I am letting Demetrius be the master of my mind. I am handing him the keys to my tranquility. I refuse to give him that power. The physical symptoms of his anger, the rapid heartbeat, the tensed muscles, slowly began to subside. He took a deep, deliberate breath, centering himself in the present moment. Demetrius, expecting a violent outburst or a humiliated retreat, frowned as Lucius simply stood there, perfectly still, his expression transitioning from fury to absolute, unbothered calm. "Are you deaf as well as poor?" Demetrius barked, unnerved by the silence. Lucius finally spoke, his voice measured, devoid of venom, yet carrying an authority that cut through the noise of the street. "You owe me a debt, Demetrius. That is a fact of commerce, recorded in ink," Lucius said calmly. "Whether you possess the honor to pay it is entirely up to you. That is a matter for your character, not mine. As for my fortunes, the sea took my ships, but it seems your own bitterness has taken your humanity. I know which loss I would rather suffer." Demetrius's smirk vanished, replaced by a flush of embarrassment. He opened his mouth to retort, but he had no script for this. He had expected to fight a wounded animal. Instead, he was facing a mountain. The bystanders who had stopped to watch the spectacle began to murmur, their judgment shifting entirely from the ruined merchant to the petty rival. Without waiting for a response, Lucius stepped around Demetrius and continued down the street. He had won a victory far greater than any mercantile success. He had been handed a burning coal by his enemy, and instead of clutching it and burning his own hand, he had simply let it drop to the ground. He had conquered not Demetrius, but himself. He had proven that while the world could take his wealth and men could offer insults, no one, absolutely no one, could compel him to be angry without his consent. The fire of anger had been starved of its oxygen, his own assent to the feeling. Lucius walked on, his pockets empty, his ships gone, but his mind a fortress, impregnable and serene. The victory over Demetrius had proven to Lucius that he could master his immediate impulses, but the true test of a philosopher's resolve does not come in the heat of a public confrontation. It comes in the silent, suffocating hours of the night. A month had passed since the storm. Lucius's sprawling estate, with its sunlit courtyards and marble statues, had been sold to satisfy his creditors. The servants had been dismissed, the fine garments traded for coarse wool, and the lavish banquets replaced by simple rations of lentils and stale bread. He had relocated to a cramped, draughty room above a noisy tavern in the poorest district of Athens. For the first few weeks, the sheer momentum of his crisis had kept him focused. But as the dust settled and the stark, unglamorous reality of his new life became a daily routine, the old enemy began to creep back under the door. It was no longer the sharp, acute panic of the shipwreck, but a dull, chronic dread, fear. It whispered to him from the dark corners of his tiny room. It was the fear of the unknown, the fear of winter approaching with no money for firewood, the fear of falling ill with no means to pay a physician, the fear of dying utterly forgotten. One particularly cold night, the wind howled through the cracks in the wooden shutters, rattling them against the stone frame. Lucius lay on his thin pallet of straw, pulling his single, threadbare blanket tighter around his shoulders. He stared at the ceiling, paralyzed. The anxiety was a cold hand wrapped around his spine. His mind, ever the imaginative storyteller, began painting terrifying futures. He saw himself shivering in the streets, begging for coppers, completely broken in body and spirit. He saw the inevitable decay of his life stretching out before him in a bleak, unending line of suffering. He tried to recall Clenthis's lesson on the dichotomy of control, but the fear was too loud. It is easy to say, "I control my mind," when the sun is shining, Lucius thought bitterly. But how do I control it when my belly is empty and the frost bites at my toes? He realized that his fear was fueled by avoidance. He had been desperately hoping that his situation would somehow magically improve, averting his eyes from the very real possibility that it might get worse. By running from the worst-case scenario, he had given it absolute power over him. It was a monster hiding in the dark, growing larger with every step he took away from it. Lucius sat up, wrapping the thin blanket around himself like a philosopher's cloak. He lit a small oil lamp, its weak, flickering flame pushing back the shadows just enough to illuminate his meager surroundings. He decided he would not run anymore. He would turn around, look the monster in the eye, and examine its teeth. He would practice what the Stoics called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Instead of fighting the catastrophic thoughts, Lucius invited them in. He forced himself to vividly imagine the absolute worst that could happen. "What is the worst outcome?" he asked himself aloud, his voice steadying the trembling in his chest. "I lose this room. I am forced to sleep on the streets." He closed his eyes and visualized it. He felt the imagined cold of the cobblestones. He pictured the disdainful looks of passers-by. He imagined the ache of a truly empty stomach. Not just the mild hunger he felt now, but the hollow, clawing pain of starvation. Then he asked the crucial question: if this comes to pass, will it destroy my character? Will it force me to be cruel or dishonest or unjust? No, it will be uncomfortable. It will be painful. But it will not make me a lesser man unless I allow it to. Set aside a certain number of days, during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, "Is this the condition that I feared?" Seneca. Lucius realized that his fear was largely built on anticipation, not reality. The human body is remarkably resilient. It was the mind that was fragile. To prove this to himself, he decided to strip the fear of its mystery. He would not just imagine the worst. He would rehearse it. For the next 3 days, Lucius subjected himself to voluntary hardship. He took his thin pallet off the bed frame and slept directly on the cold, hard floor. He ate nothing but half a loaf of stale bread and drank only water. He wore his thinnest tunic, intentionally exposing himself to the autumn chill. On the first day, his body ached and his mind rebelled. By the second day, the hunger was a constant, dull ache, and the cold made his joints stiff. But on the third night, as he lay on the hard floor, staring at the ceiling, a profound realization washed over him. He was cold, he was hungry, he was uncomfortable, but he was fine. He had not perished. The world had not ended. The suffering was entirely manageable. The monster hiding in the dark was just a stray dog. Unpleasant, perhaps, but not a leviathan capable of swallowing his soul. By familiarizing himself with the worst-case scenario, Lucius had completely neutralized its power to terrorize him. The anxiety that had kept him awake dissolved into a quiet, enduring confidence. He knew now that no matter what fate threw at him, he could endure it. He had hit rock bottom and found that the rock was solid ground. He could stand on it. He blew out the oil lamp, laid his head back on the floor, and for the first time since the storm had taken his ships, Lucius slept deeply, soundly, and without a single dream of drowning. He was no longer afraid of tomorrow, because he had already lived it today. A full turning of the seasons had passed since the great squall had swallowed the fortune of Lucius the merchant. To the gossiping citizens of Athens who still remembered his name, he was a living tragedy, a cautionary tale of a man cast down from the golden heights of prosperity to the dusty, invisible ranks of the working poor. But to Lucius, the man looking back in the polished bronze mirror each morning, was a stranger. More importantly, for the very first time in his adult life, that stranger was a true friend. He had secured modest employment working as a junior clerk for a gruff harbour master. His days, which were once spent commanding massive fleets, dining with politicians, and negotiating fortunes over spiced wine, were now consumed by the mundane. He spent his hours meticulously recording shipments of grain, calculating harbour taxes, and organizing mountainous stacks of papyrus ledgers. The work was undeniably tedious, and the pay was barely enough to keep a roof over his head and a meagre fire burning in his hearth. His hands, once soft, manicured, and heavy with ornate gold rings, were now rough, stained permanently with cheap black ink, and heavily calloused from hauling wooden crates and heavy parchment scrolls. Yet, beneath the coarse wool of his simple tunic, a profound, unshakable tranquility radiated from him. One crisp, remarkably clear autumn morning, Lucius was dispatched to the bustling docks to inventory a newly arrived shipment from Egypt. The port of Piraeus was a theatre of chaotic energy. The air was thick with the pungent competing smells of drying fish, hot tar, sea salt, and the sweat of 1,000 labouring men. Seagulls shrieked overhead in jagged circles, diving toward the masts of the great, creaking wooden vessels bobbing in the harbour. As he stood at the very edge of the stone pier, his wooden ledger resting comfortably in the crook of his arm, Lucius paused. He lifted his gaze from the columns of numbers and looked out at the vast, shimmering expanse of the Aegean Sea. This was the very same sea that had ruined him. These were the same dark, churning waters that had stolen his wealth, erased his worldly status, and drowned his pride. A year ago, standing on this exact spot, he had wanted to scream at the heavens and curse the gods for their cruelty. He had felt like a helpless victim, trapped in a malicious, chaotic universe. But as he gazed at the gentle, rhythmic waves lapping softly against the algae-covered stone pilings today, he felt no resentment. He searched his chest for the familiar hot spark of anger, but found nothing. He felt, astonishingly, a deep and overwhelming sense of gratitude. He had touched the absolute zenith of Stoic practice, amor fati, the love of one's fate. Lucius did not merely tolerate his poverty with gritted teeth. He warmly embraced it. He saw the shipwreck no longer as a personal tragedy, but as a necessary, beautiful thread in the grand, interconnected tapestry of the universe, what the Stoic philosophers called sympatheia. The storm had destroyed his ships, yes, but perhaps that same storm had brought desperate rain to a drought-stricken farm miles away. Who was he? A mere mortal with a limited vantage point, to demand that the universe reorganize its weather patterns simply to protect his profits. When he was wealthy, Lucius realized with a startling clarity. He had actually been a slave. He had been a prisoner to his own reputation, constantly terrified of what other merchants and aristocrats thought of him. He had been heavily chained to his possessions, living in perpetual quiet agony that a storm, a cunning thief, or a sudden market crash would take them away. His happiness had been entirely contingent on external factors, aligning perfectly with his desires, an impossible, exhausting demand to place on a world entirely out of his jurisdiction. The storm had not destroyed his life. It had violently, mercifully liberated him. It had stripped away the false, glittering pillars he had leaned on, forcing him to discover the only true foundation a man can possess, the impenetrable citadel of his own inner character. A blazing fire makes flame and brightness out of everything that is thrown into it. Marcus Aurelius. Lucius had become that fire. The sheer weight of the tragedy that would have permanently crushed a lesser man had become the very fuel for his virtue. Poverty had forcefully taught him the beauty of temperance. Public humiliation had cultivated a deep, genuine humility. Paralyzing fear had birthed an enduring courage. He was infinitely richer now, possessing a fortress of mind, than he had ever been when his underground vaults were overflowing with silver talents. As he dipped his reed pen to check off the last sack of Egyptian grain on his ledger, a sudden, violent crash shattered the steady rhythm of the docks. Further down the pier, a commotion erupted. A beautifully dressed merchant, draped in expensive purple-dyed silk, was screaming at a terrified dock worker. The merchant's face was flushed a dangerous crimson, his neck veins bulging, his arms flailing wildly in the air. At their feet lay the remnants of a disastrous accident. A massive wooden crate had slipped from the hoisting ropes, shattering its contents onto the unforgiving stone. Hundreds of shards of exquisitely painted, priceless Corinthian pottery glittered in the morning sun, ruined beyond repair. The merchant was tearing at his own hair, spewing venomous curses at the weeping worker, cursing the incompetence of the docks, and screaming at the sky for his terrible misfortune. Lucius recognized the man instantly. It was Demetrius. The bitter rival who had cruelly mocked Lucius in the street a year ago had since aggressively expanded his mercantile empire, acquiring more ships, more warehouses, more wealth, and, as a direct result, infinitely more stress. Watching Demetrius entirely lose his mind over a broken crate of baked clay, Lucius felt a profound, aching wave of compassion wash over him. He saw the situation not with the eyes of a rival, but with the clear vision of a philosopher. He saw the heavy, invisible chains wrapped tightly around Demetrius's neck, the suffocating bonds of material attachment and unchecked emotion. Demetrius walked the streets acting like a master of men, but in reality, he was a helpless captive to every gust of wind, every market fluctuation, and every clumsy dockhand. The broken pottery had not just cost Demetrius gold, it had completely hijacked his soul. Lucius did not gloat. He did not feel a dark thrill of vindication or whisper karma into the wind. Stoicism taught that all humans are limbs of the same body. To rejoice in another's suffering, even an enemy's, was to poison oneself. Lucius only felt a quiet, sorrowful sympathy for a brother, still trapped in the terrifying, blinding storm of his own mind. "Are you finished with the tally, clerk?" the harbour master called out roughly, breaking Lucius's reverie. "Yes, sir. Every sack accounted for," Lucius replied, his voice calm and even. He closed his wooden ledger, the familiar clack of the wood grounding him in the present moment, and tucked it securely under his arm. He took one last, long look at the sea. It was vast, incredibly powerful, unpredictable, and entirely indifferent to his existence. It would bring overflowing fortunes to some tomorrow, and it would swallow the hopes of others. It was not evil. It was not good. It was just the nature of water and wind. Lucius smiled. It was a genuine, warm smile that creased the corners of his eyes. He turned his back to the sea and the screaming merchant, and began the long walk back to his cramped, draughty room. His step was remarkably light, his breathing deep and steady, his mind resembling a perfectly clear, cloudless sky. He had lost the world, but in the ashes of that loss, he had finally conquered himself. The tempest had broken him, only to reveal the unbreakable, eternal stone beneath. He was no longer a merchant of fragile goods. He was a master of his own mind, and absolutely no storm, no sea, and no man could ever take that away. You have the power to calm the storm within. Like Lucius, you cannot control the winds of fate, but you can always control the sails of your mind. Anxiety, anger, and fear only rule you if you give them permission. Choose today to reclaim your inner fortress. If this story brought you value and peace, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more ancient wisdom applied to modern life. Stay stoic and stay strong.